I have been working on this little hat for a little while, and I'm almost finished with it. And it dawned on me that the stitch I'm using can be very, very confusing when you're doing it in the round. The hat is basically 1 by 1 rib and fisherman's rib, done in some dazzle, some of my vintage yarn. I don't think they've had this for sale since maybe the 1980s, maybe a little later, but it's pretty old. The fisherman's rib is a rib stitch, but it is a double worked rib stitch, which gives a very dense fabric. And for a hat, it's perfect. It'll keep somebody's head nice and warm. In the description below, I will give you the pattern for the hat. But right now we're going to look at the stitch. Now, a fisherman's rib is that. It's a rib stitch, but it's a double worked rib stitch. Let me explain. Basically, you knit in the stitch below. Did you see what I did? This is the one on my needle. This is the one from the previous row, and I knit into it. What that does is it lays 2 loops of yarn on that stitch. Then we purl. Let me do that again. So not this, the needle doesn't go in this stitch, but it goes in the one below it. And it's usually written knit one below. One, that would be K1BL, knit one below. Now, I'm going to finish this row, and then I will explain what we're doing next. So, normally this would be knitted flat and not in the round. And when it's knitted in the flat, my purl stitch, the one I just did here, on the back side, it looks like a knit stitch. So if I had knitted to the end and turned my work, when it came to this, what was a purl stitch on the front side, is now a knit stitch on the back side. And if I just knit one below, I would duplicate the same thing as I did on the front, but on the purl. But we're not knitting back and forth, we're knitting in the round. So I'm not going to turn my work. So let me show you what we do. So that's the last one of my stitches, was the purl stitch. So this is the one that I knitted below with the last round. That's the knit stitch. As you can see on this stitch here, I actually have 2 stitches caught in it. That's because I knitted one below. Now, this time around, I don't want to do that again because I have a big mess, but I want to make sure that my purl is knitted below, but it's a purl, not a knit. It would have been a knit on the back side, but on this side it's a purl. So, not in this stitch, but here, so that we duplicate what we did with the knit stitch. Knit, purl, knit, purl below. Now the problem with this 2-row repeat is that if I get interrupted and I lay my work down and I say, oh my, was I on the first row or was I on the second row? I don't know. So let me look at my stitches and find out which row I was on. Oops, I dropped one there, didn't I? That was the purl below. Okay, and that's the easiest way to look. See what you did on the last stitch. On the last stitch, which was a purl, I can see that I have 2 strands caught in that stitch. So my next one would be just simply a knit. And if I look at this stitch, I can see that the row before, I literally have 2 strands of yarn caught in that stitch. So this time I want to knit it. Just knit it plain. So purl one below, knit one, purl one below, knit one. Now, As far as the hat goes, I'm almost finished with it. I'm just going to simply finish it off with a little bit of stockinette and then pull it tight. Nothing fancy. It's going to be a nice warm hat for somebody. In my vintage yarn, I don't have very much of this left, and I only come upon it every once in a while in like a resale shop or in somebody's old stash. Anyway, I hope you have learned something from this, and this is an interesting stitch. If you can imagine a scarf knitted in this, but of course the scarf would be back and forth and not round and round, it would make a really warm scarf. This is going to make a really nice warm hat, and normally this is what is put into a sweater that makes a very, very bulky, warm sweater. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe.